All righty. Welcome again, everybody. So excited for diving into chapter 6 of Outwitting the Devil. And thank you, Rhonda, for giving us our page number. So we're on page number 134 if you're in the PDF, and we're starting chapter 6. Now, this is a very interesting chapter. We left off at the end of chapter 5. The devil had kind of left us with a cliffhanger here. Okay. And he basically says that he uses this law that men of science really haven't tapped into yet, something that's just not very well known or taught. And he indicated, so chapter 6 gives us a name for this system that he uses, and it's called hypnotic rhythm. Hypnotic rhythm. So now we're going to dive into what that really means. Let's look at Hill's first question, because before the enemy introduced it, he said this is a mystery. And Hill says, well, what is this mysterious law through which you can take permanent control of people's bodies even before you take over their souls? The whole world will want to know more about this law and how it operates. So the devil's claim is that once I get you by this law, you're mine. The spell can't really be broken. And so Hill says it's hard. The devil says it will be hard to describe the law so you will understand it, but you may call it hypnotic rhythm. It's the same law through which people can be hypnotized. And so Hill says, so you get to use laws of nature to bind your victims. And the devil's like, yep, that's what's going on here. I take over their minds and bodies even before they die, whenever I can lure them or frighten them into hypnotic rhythm. And um, and so Hill says, okay, well, help me understand what hypnotic rhythm is. And the devil says, I'll have to go back into time and space and give you a brief elementary description of how nature uses hypnotic rhythm. Otherwise, you'll not be able to understand my description of how I use this universal law to control human beings. He's like, it's not going to make sense to you unless you have something to reference it to. And, Hill's like, okay, but keep it simple. And the devil says, okay, I'm going to do my best. So he says, you, of course, know that nature maintains a perfect balance between all the elements and all the energy in the universe. You can see that the stars and planets move with perfect precision, each one keeping its own place in time and space. You can see that the seasons of the year come and go with perfect regularity. You can see that the oak tree grows from an acorn and a pine grows from the seed of its ancestor. An acorn never produces a pine, and a pine never produces an oak. So he's basically referring back here to nature, to things that we can understand, which have their own systems in place, and those systems don't change. So he's describing a rhythm here. An acorn is always going to produce an oak tree. It goes across, it has a system built in it. It can do that without thinking, right? So he's pointing to these things that are already on their own trajectories. And it helps us to see there is something in place that just keeps going in the same loop, same loop, same loop. You're never going to see the acorn produce a pine because it goes in the same loop, same loop, same loop. So y'all see what he's saying here? He says these are simple things which anyone can understand. What one cannot see is the universal law through which nature maintains perfect balance throughout the myriad of universes. You earthbound caught a fragmentary glimpse of this great universal law when Newton discovered that it holds your earth in its position and causes all material objects to be attracted towards the center of the earth. He called the law gravitation. But so he's saying there's gravity, there's things that are pulled into position. Okay. And he says, but he did not go far enough in his study of the law. If he had, he would have discovered that the same law which holds your earth in position and helps nature to maintain a perfect balance over the four dimensions in which all matter and energy are contained is the web in which I entangle and control the minds of human beings. So, y'all, how many of y'all heard of the book The Secret, or have you seen that movie? Okay, called The Secret. I can't remember. I'm sure I don't even remember how long ago it's been out, but it basically talks about the law of attraction, and that was the secret. That's the secret. Okay, the law of attraction. And this is what the devil is really referencing here. He says it's gravitation. It's the fact that what we think about, we pull into our orbit. Okay. He's saying this is what you see happening in nature. There's this balance here. He says all matter, everything is held in perfect balance, but that same thing, that gravitational pull, is what I'm using to entangle and control the people's minds. Okay. It's the pull, the gravitation, he says. So Hill says, well, tell me more of this astounding law of hypnotic rhythm. And he says, as I've already stated, there is a universal form of energy with which nature keeps a perfect balance between all matter and energy. She makes specialized use of this universal building material by breaking it up into different wavelengths. The breaking up process is carried on through habit. You will better understand what I'm trying to convey if I compare it with the method by which one learns to play music. Okay, so he's breaking it down for us here, of what he's talking about, how habits become rhythm. Okay, this is what we're equating it to. He says, at first, the notes are memorized in the mind. Then they are related to one another through melody and rhythm. By repetition, the melody and rhythm become fixed in the mind. Observe how relentlessly a musician must repeat a tune before he masters it. Through repetition, the musical notes blend, and then you have music. So he's saying each one of these notes, there's one and another and another and another. And so the notes are separate until they're blended with rhythm, until the melody starts to set in. He's like, there is a pattern in which that is happening. If you look at any one note individually, it's that one thing. But the fact of the matter is, blended together, they become rhythm, they become music. Okay. So think about that when you're crossing that with habits. One habit in itself is just the habit, but he's saying that same thing, even though they're individual, I show you how to connect that through this continual thinking pattern, which now creates this rhythm. Okay, so we get you in the same motion, same habits over and over, over and over. He says, any impulse of thought that the mind repeats over and over through habit forms an organized rhythm. Okay, any impulse of thought that the mind repeats over and over through habit forms an organized rhythm. Undesirable habits can be broken. They must be broken before they assume the proportions of rhythm. Are you following me? Y'all, it's a lot in this little paragraph, but it's big to understand. Now, if we go back to, when we started talking about capturing the thoughts, we did a study around practically how we do that. And one of the things that we discovered as we were looking through, understand a little bit about neuroscience, okay, is that thoughts are branches. Your brain creates new branches to hold information every day. Every time somebody's speaking, there's a branch that's created in your brain to hold this information. The more that you keep hearing and using that information, the stronger that branch becomes, and then it becomes something permanent in your brain, which is this thing that it'll actually become from this subconscious, you'll begin to operate from kind of the subconscious level, meaning that that information is stored there. It's how you operate. It's part of how you deal in life. Okay. And this is what he's saying here. See, one of the things we know is that through use, those branches become stronger. If we don't use it that much, that's why you can, some of us have talked about, even in this book, how you read it last year, you had notes from last year. And even as you go back and look at some of those notes, you didn't even remember writing the note, right? It's because you never went back and saw it again. And so that branch in your brain that was holding that information, it didn't stay there. And so this is what the devil is saying. You have an opportunity either to create this lasting pieces of information, these lasting habits in your mind, or not. Now, he uses them for the negative forms. So he says, if you have any thought that through habits you keep using, and that, remember how we talked about how many thoughts we have throughout the day, 100,000, 120, 30,000 thoughts. And that the average person's thoughts, 70% of them are negative. That's a habit of thinking. And so he says, I'm using that habit right there to create a rhythm. So now your rhythm of thinking is negative. Your pattern is negative. And so he's saying it can be broken before you keep going down the same. And y'all, have you ever talked to somebody who you keep having the same conversations over and over again, no matter whatever their problem is, you give them a solution and they say, yeah, okay, but then they come right back around to the same pattern of thinking? No matter what you say, it comes right back. That's the habit. That's the rhythm that they are in. And they don't have that information you're giving them. It's not sticking because they're just hearing it. They have to keep hearing it, keep hearing it, keep hearing, and desire to want to change the pattern. You see, the devil knows how we operate. The devil knows how we operate. And so he's like, yeah, I got you. And so the devil says, well, to continue, rhythm is the last stage of habit. Rhythm is the last stage of habit. So it's like you can develop a habit. A habit is one thing, he says, but the series, the pattern in which you keep using that habit is the final clenching. That's my final rope. That's the final chain. Is that not only is it a habit, but it is a routine habit in which you don't even think about or realize is a habit anymore. You're in a rhythm. Rhythm is the last stage of habit. Any thought or physical movement, which is repeated over and over through the principle of habit, finally reaches the proportion of rhythm. You said you have, and let's see. It says, then the habit cannot be broken because nature takes it over and makes it permanent. I'm gonna, well, let me finish this. It says, it is something like a whirlpool in water. An object may keep floating indefinitely unless it is caught in a whirlpool. Then it is carried round and round, but it cannot escape. The energy with which people think may be compared with water in a river. And so he's saying that you can float along, your thoughts are kind of floating along like this water, but ultimately I snatch you into certain habits that I keep you in, and it creates this rhythm. That's the whirlpool. He says you can be floating along, but I'm going to snatch you up with one of these habits, and then you fall into the whirlpool, which makes that rhythm, makes it permanent. And this is, I want to point out something here, because I was having a conversation with someone the other day around this. You see, there are times you have to be able to discern. The Bible says that you really need to be able to discern the seasons you're in. the time that you're in. And see, there are some times for a lot of us in which you went into a season of hiding, or not you hiding, but you being hidden by God, meaning that God kind of encapsulated you. He protected you. He surrounded you. You weren't so much in the spotlight because he was building you. He's healing you. He's pulling out these things that needed to be pulled out. He's strengthening you. He's establishing you. And so we can get caught up in a pattern of being hidden, that our rhythm becomes not to be seen. Okay, not necessarily to take a step. Sometimes we get in the habit of just sitting and waiting. Okay, and there is okay in certain times when God has got you sitting down. I've been there. But there comes a shift in which he has now said, you're strong enough. Now let's you and I go to work. Now we have to take a step forward. Now we have to come out and let our light shine. And this is what, this is kind of talking about here, in the fact that physical movement, sometimes just physically doing the things that are necessary for you to build a business, doing things that are necessary for you to cultivate your relationships and things like that, that now you have to start taking those steps. And so you almost have to retrain yourself, okay, from that position of, while you were hidden, you weren't doing, but now when it's time to come out, you got to come out of the rhythm of not doing. Does that make sense? You see, even as God moves you and shifts you, you got to be able to recognize that this is not the time now that you're hidden. This is the time that you are seen. And so you've been in a rhythm or a pattern, and then that's where I'm no longer being hidden, but now I'm hiding. Okay. And those are two different things. You have to be able to recognize you don't hide. Now shake off the rhythm of being hidden. Okay. Because you have the grace now to be seen. Understand? And sometimes we have to really be conscious when it's time to do that. And it is time to do that, by the way, if any of you were wondering. Okay. All right. And so Hill goes on. He says, so is this the way you take control of the minds of people? Yes. All I have to do is gain control over any mind. All I have to do to gain control over any mind is to induce its owner to drift. And so Hill says, am I to understand that the habit of drifting is the major danger through which people lose their prerogative or privilege of thinking their own thoughts and shaping their own earthly destinations? So he says, drifting means you give up your right to think. What does that sound like? We give up our power. That's what he's saying. Drifting is the way I take your power. So you don't have, you no longer have the right to think, the privilege to think. And the devil says that and much more. Drifting is also the habit through which I take over the souls after they give up their physical bodies. So it's like, I just keep you in my possession. I make sure that your energy is my energy. Yikes. He says, then the only way a human being can be saved from eternal annihilation is by maintaining control over his own mind while he is on earth. Is that true? And the devil says, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Those who control and use their own minds escape my web. I get all the others as naturally as the sun sets in the west. He's like, don't think for yourself. Don't think for yourself. I get everybody that way. And so Hill says, is that all there is to the business of being saved from eternal annihilation? Doesn't what you call your opposition have anything to do with saving people? Okay. And so Hill's questioning this idea of salvation here, right? And so the devil, what does he say? He says, I see you are a thinker. Okay. You're thinking very deeply. He says, my opposition, the power you earthbound called God, has everything to do with the salvation of people from eternal annihilation. And for that reason, it is my opposition who provides every human being with the privilege of using his own mind. So the devil is not lying here. He's saying because he's in charge, God is in charge of salvation, he decided for you to be able to make the choice. And the devil says, if you don't do your own thinking, I'm making the choice for you. If you don't decide to accept this use of your mind in this way, then you're mine. He says, if you use that power by maintaining control over your own mind, you become part of it when you give up your physical body. If you neglect to use it, then I have the privilege of taking advantage of the neglect through the law of hypnotic rhythm. He's like, it's all your power. It's all yours in the first place. If you use it, great. That's where you're part of my opposition. If you don't use it, wonderful. I get it. I get to use it. You notice there's no middle ground here. There's no lukewarmness. There's no playing the fence. Either you use it, either you think or you don't think. Either you think in fear or you think in faith. There's not a middle option. And so Hill says, how much of a person do you take over when you gain control of him? And the devil says, everything that is left after he ceases to control and use his own mind. So in other words, when you gain control of a person, you take over all there is of his individuality up to the time that he quits using his own mind. Is that correct? That's how I operate. You know, what's he saying here? He says, what do you get to control? And the devil says, everything, everything that makes him him. Everything that makes him him. That is a pretty bold statement, but how does that play? How does that go back to what he said? Well, he says that if you drift in one area, you're eventually going to drift in all areas. So what he's saying is that I get to intertwine in every single thing that they do, every single piece of their being. There's no separation. You know, he's like, if you don't think in the area around, look at, we talked about finances up there. He mentioned marriage up there, right? All of these areas in which he's sitting here planting thoughts. And so he says, I get to take over whatever is available of that person. Hill says, what do you do with people whom you control before death? Of what good are they to you while they live? Here's what we said earlier. He says, I use them, or what is left of them after I take charge, as propagandists to help me prepare the minds of others to drift. Y'all, you know, one thing I was at an event one time, and Jordan was with me, and there was somebody that came up to us. We were all hanging out, having, eating afterwards, and somebody came up to us and was just talking about Jordan, how tall he is and big he is already, and was asking about, was he playing ball? And he was playing football. And the person proceeded to tell about concussions and all of these awful things that can happen while you're playing football. And I was like, no, shut that down right here and there. Go somewhere else with that. My kid is covered. Now, they were saying it in this way in which they thought, they were being helpful, or, pointing out all the great things that he could do. But And this is exactly what we mean. The devil says he uses people as the propagandist. Y'all, you have to be careful who speaks into and over your own life or that of your children or your family, the people, because you have to be able to hear. It's like immediately my spirit just jumped out when I started hearing the conversation, because I was like, no, you're not about to plant these fears in my child's mind right now, and I had to shut down the conversation. But how many, this is what the devil's talking about, propagandists. When I have people in this rhythm, when they are feeding off of only my thoughts, I make sure they're talking loud. They're probably going to be the loudest people in the room. You understand? And that's what the devil is saying. I'm going to make sure they speak for me to everybody else. And so Hill says, you not only fool people into destroying their power to control their minds, but you use them to help you trap others. So I'm going to make sure you hear my opinion. I want you to see things my way. That's what he's saying. That's what the devil says I use. And he says, yeah, I let no opportunity get away from me. Of course, if you won't take, if I can surround you, this is what he talked about earlier, environment. If I can surround you with with people who have these fearful thoughts, then it's eventually going to rub off on your thought pattern. So you have to go back and think about that. Who is in my ear? Who's in my ear? And then Hill says, you not only fool people. Oh, no, I'm sorry. He says, let us come back to the subject of hypnotic rhythm. Tell me more of how this law works. Show me how you use individuals to keep you, to help you gain control over others. I want to know something of the most effective way you use hypnotic rhythm. And the devil says, that's easy. The thing I like best is to fill the minds of people with fear. Once I fill one's mind with fear, I have little trouble causing him to drift until I have entangled him in the web of hypnotic rhythm. So he says, those fear thoughts, you must begin to analyze. I call Tony, I mess with him all the time. Y'all ever been around those no people? I mean, immediately, it don't matter what the question is, the first response is no. I call him a no man. Like literally, no matter, you can say, is the sky blue? No. Okay. Immediate answer is no. Okay. But what I want you to do now is always is to begin to pay attention to in your own life. What is your first response? And is my first response one, where did I get that response from? Is that a response of fear or is it a response of faith? Do I say when it's time for me to make any kind of move, if I said, it's time for me to make this phone call or send this message, and I say, no, I'm not going to do it right now. Did that come from fear or did that come from faith? Right? It's time for us to, I want to increase my vision of what I want to see in business, those kind of things. I want to draw out my goals, but I can't trust that right now. Let me go get this other job and add this to my plate and da da da. Is that a reaction of fear or faith? So you have to begin to question where you're normally operating out of. And so he'll ask, what human fear best serves your purpose? The fear of death. And he says, why? Why a fear of death? Because no one knows, and by the very nature of the laws of the universe, no one can prove definitely what happens after death. This uncertainty frightens people out of their wits. People who give over their minds to fear, any sort of fear, neglect to use their minds and begin to drift. Eventually, they drift into the whirlpool of hypnotic rhythm from which they may never escape. So he's like, this is one of my favorites because you can't prove anything about it. You don't have any definitive answers. There's no YouTube video out there about what's going on in heaven right now. There's not one that they've been recording live that's going to tell you. And so he's like, this is the one. You don't have proof that you can. And y'all listen, that right there just leads to another another idea or train of thought that we have to be careful of in faith. Is there are people of faith who still say, I won't believe it till I see it. Okay, I might be stepping on some toes here, but is that biblical? Is that fear or faith talking? Well, Hebrews tells us that faith is the substance of things not seen. The very definition of faith tells you you're not going to see it. So why would I say I have to wait to see it? I have to wait to have faith. Y'all see how he got us? Even in the religious sectors, a Christian will say that. But you got to catch that. Where did that come from? It came from disappointment. Okay. That's really where that came from. The devil's ideas, the thoughts around disappointment. So now I can't believe it till I see it. And he's using that right here, that's very same tactic, that very same line of thinking around the fear of death. I can't prove anything about it. So it is this unknown that I cannot trust. Although those of us who are secure, knowing in our relationship with the Holy Spirit, we can feel that. We know we're good. Right? But he uses what we think we don't know, what we can't see. And he says that if you start letting this fear roll around in your mind, no matter what it is, ultimately those thoughts are going to lead you right into the whirlpool. And so Hill says, then you don't mind what religious leaders think or say of you when they speak of death? He says, not as long as they say something. As long as they're talking about me, that's all I care about. If the churches should stop talking about me, my cause would receive a severe setback. Every attack made against me fixes the fear of me in the minds of all who are influenced by it. You see, opposition is the thing that keeps some people from drifting, providing they do not yield to it. So the devil's like, I want you to be talking about me. Make sure they're talking about me from the pulpit. And so he says, since you say the churches are helping instead of hindering, what would give you cause to worry? So he's like, if you're not afraid of the church, who are you afraid of? What would make you worry? My only worry is that someday a real thinker may appear on earth. And what would happen if that thinker appeared? He says, you'd ask me what would happen. I'll tell you what would happen. People would learn the greatest of all truths, that the time they spend in fearing something would, if reversed, give them all they want in the material world and save them from me after death. Isn't that worth thinking about? He says, the thing that gives me worry, this thinker, that if somebody would just take the time that they're using to think about fearful things, take the same energy and just use it to think through faith. That's the person that scares me. That they don't dwell on the fear thoughts, that they would use it's the same energy. It's the same energy. He says that's what bothers me. If they would realize all they got to do is reverse their thinking. Now you got the devil running scared. You got the devil running scared of you. So Hill says, what is keeping such a thinker from appearing? And here we go back to fear of criticism. Man, because he's saying here, if there was a person who thought against the grain, I mean, because if the majority of people still think through fear, this is what he's saying. Remember, he opened this whole book up by saying, I've got 98% of the people. 98% of the people think through fear predominantly. And all it takes is somebody to reverse thinking through faith. And he's like, because the majority of people don't think that way, this person is going to get criticized. Okay. So he says, fear of criticism is what's keeping them from appearing, fear of looking like they're doing something different. It may interest you to know that the fear of criticism is the only effective weapon I have with which to whip you. If you were not afraid to publish this confession after you wring it from me, I would lose my earthly kingdom. So he's saying that's the one way I got you is this fear of criticism. What will people say? Man, and I can tell you for certain that was something I wrestled with in starting this call, because I knew I was going to be saying things that were against the grain of what we normally would think around business and we're taught around business. And I think God knew ultimately, even though I was going to wrestle with it for a minute, ultimately, I don't care what you have to say, because he built me up to be strong enough to be able to stand in the face of criticism. And that is something that is a task for each of you on here, that you would be able to stand up in the truth God has given you versus what anybody else wants to feed you. And so he's using this example here. The devil says, that's how I got you. If you weren't afraid to do this, it would deal a great blow. I'd lose everything. And he says, and Hill's like, well, what if I did surprise you and publish it? How long would it be until you lost your kingdom? Long enough for one generation of children to grow into understanding. So he says, if you publish this, but it's not just the publishing, but if this was really taught, if this was really brought into mainstream, he said it would only take one generation and everything would change. Everything would change. He says, you cannot take the adults from me. I have them too securely sewed up. But if you publish this confession, it would be sufficient to keep me from gaining control of the yet unborn and those who have not yet reached the age of reason. You wouldn't dare publish what I have told you about the religious leaders. They would crucify you. He's like, the religious leaders definitely wouldn't stand for this. So he's still playing into this fear of criticism for Hill. He still keep throwing it on. And Hill was like, well, they don't even do crucifixion anymore. So what are you talking about? Right. And he says, I don't mean on a cross. I mean socially, financially, they will crucify you. He says, your income will be shut off. You would become a social outcast. Religious leaders and their followers alike would treat you with scorn. And so Hill says, well, what if I just threw in my lot? What if I, decided I'm going to do it anyway? He says, I'm going to be with those people who make a pretense of using their own mind rather than the fear of the masses who do not, the masses of whom you claim 98%. He's like, what if I just decide to become one of those 2%ers? He says, if you have the courage enough to do this, you will crimp my style. And Sharon Lecter makes a note right here because we know that this book still did not get published when it was written because of fear of criticism. So the exact thing, I wonder as Hill, it just makes me think that as Hill was even writing this, even as he knew he knew what he was uncovering, that he also knew what he was struggling with, and that is plain to see here on these papers, that he knew he was still struggling and didn't know what he was going to do with this, and that fear played into his entire family. And so Hill says, why do you lay claim to no scientists? Don't you like scientists? Yeah, I like all people, but true scientists, they're out of my reach. Why? Because they think for themselves and they spend their time studying natural laws. They deal with cause and effect. They deal with facts wherever they can find them, but they do not make the mistake of believing. But he says, but do not make the mistake of believing scientists have no religion. They have a very definite religion. And Hill says, what is that religion? Religion of truth, the religion of natural law. If the world ever produces an accurate thinker with ability to fathom the deeply buried secret of life and death, you can be sure that science will be responsible for the catastrophe. He says, if a real thinker ever really emerges, if somebody really is able to uncover here what happens, the secrets of life, the secrets of death, he says, it would be a catastrophe. And that person would probably come from the field of science. And so, y'all, he says this interesting thing here in terms of thinking, don't think that scientists don't have religion. And I think that often, we do try to separate in the church. It's very much a separation that, I mean, at least where I grew up, that science was often considered almost this atheistic kind of viewpoint, and that was something that's set totally on the side. However, there are many Christian scientists, and what you are seeing now, I think what is being seen, particularly the more that they study science, the more they see God, the more it proves the Bible, the more the Bible is proven, the more we discover. And so we can't separate those two, because like you said, it is almost that God is allowing proof. We're able to see things that that we couldn't see before. So I like the fact that he says it's the religion of truth. It's the religion of natural law. These are things that we can study. These are all things that God put in motion. God created those laws. And to be able to sit there and study those is a phenomenal way to be able to understand all of life, because those laws hold together most of what we see. So the last thing, we'll stop right here. He says, catastrophe to whom? Of course, to me. And so this, I guess we'll finish up this page here. He says, let's get back to the subject of hypnotic rhythm. I want to know more about it. Is it something like the principle through which people can hypnotize one another? He says it's precisely the same thing. Why are you repeating your question? And so Hill makes a note here, as we've talked about earlier. There's a lot of repetition used in this book. He says, it's an old worldly custom of mine, Your Majesty. He says, I'm forcing you to repeat your statements for the sake of emphasis, and I'm also trying to see if I can catch you in a lie. He's like, I know I forced this confession and everything is supposed to be true. I'm just trying to double check that you are not giving us any falsehoods here. And he says, get back to hypnotic rhythm. Am I a victim of it? Not now, but you barely missed falling into my web. You drifted towards the whirlpool of hypnotic rhythm until you discovered how to force me into making this confession. Then I lost control of you. All right, I gotta finish. I gotta go down a little bit further. Okay. He says, how interesting. You're not trying to recapture me through flattery, are you? That would be the best bribe I could offer you. It is the bribe I used on you effectively before you got the upper hand on me. So the devil is starting to reveal to him how he personally got healed. And he was like, how did you flatter me then? I didn't recognize what you were doing. And of course, he says, through sex and the desire for self-expression. And Hill says, well, what effect did your bribe have on me? They caused you to neglect your major purpose in life and started you to drifting. So as long as I kept your attention over here on other stuff, doing other things, you neglected your own purpose. And he says, was that all you did to me? That was plenty. But I'm back on track and out of your reach now, am I not? You are temporarily out of my reach because you're not drifting. So the devil goes back to it's not permanent yet. And then so Hill says, and we'll stop with this concept after a couple more, maybe half the next page. What broke your spell and released me from the habit of drifting? The devil says, well, this might humiliate you. Are you sure you want to hear it? And he's like, go ahead. When you found a great love in the woman of your choice, I lost my grip on you. He said, when you partnered up with this woman, you came into agreement with this woman, I lost my grip on you. And so Hill says, wait a minute. Now, in this day and time, he says, you're going to accuse me of hiding behind a woman's skirt, are you? Like this was some kind of hit to his manhood. And he says, no, not hiding. I wouldn't put it that way. I would say you have learned how to give yourself a solid background with the embellishment of a woman's mind. So he says the skirt has nothing to do with it. Meaning, is this all about, the sex appeal, the desire for sex, all of that stuff? Is this all about this one woman? And he's like, no, it has nothing to do with that, but her brain does. When you and your wife began to combine your two brains through the habit of masterminding, every day you stumbled upon the secret power with which you forced me into this confession. Okay, so we're going to drop the mic right there because, okay. So he says, when you started a mastermind, you and your wife started thinking together in agreement. And y'all, this is the most powerful form of agreement we can have outside of our agreement with the Holy Spirit, to have that partner here on earth, and he's saying that that's what kept you out of my grip, because you found somebody else to mastermind with. And so yeah, it's important to be surrounded and to think together along the same lines of faith. That's why the enemy tries to destroy those kind of relationships so so heavily, to keep the masterminding from happening. So all righty, we're gonna stop right there for today. Anybody have anything they want to add?
I'll say something. When you was talking about the hypnotic rhythm, when he was explaining how people drift and don't even know, I guess the whirlpool thing, I had a conversation actually when I went into the home office. We have a new place where we can go pick up our policies, and Miss Tricia has her office there, but there's a receptionist place, and I was sitting there waiting for the receptionist to open up the door so I could go pick up a policy. And we were talking and got to talking about smokers and when you go somewhere. And she said, I walked into this place and smoke was everywhere, and how we've gotten so used to not being around it. But then she was just telling the story. She said, I used to be a smoker. She was like, so bad. And I remember us also discussing this last time, but she was like, there's no way you could have told me that it affected those around you. And she said, but then when I stopped and just hadn't been around it for years, and when I go in, she was like, there was no way you could tell me that was the type, I was causing those types of things. And she was like, and now I can't stand the smell of it. I couldn't smell it. But I thought that was interesting that, because it's just simple things like that, that become so much of a habit that we don't even think about what we're doing, and that's in our thoughts and how we in our conversations. And like you said, when and I won't say I don't feel like I was the type of person that will harp. I don't complain a lot, but that's because my personal business I try not to throw out in the streets. But I will say,
Mhm.
at sometimes there have been like, why does this keep happening? And but yet
Mhm.
I would keep on going back to that same old thinking, or
Mhm.
when I get discouraged, it's the same old pattern of when I know, I've been blessed and come out of it, and I go back into the same pattern. So it's a
Mhm.
blessing to have come out of that for sure, and continue
Mhm.
to grow. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
interesting reading
Yeah.
this. Like, oh
That
wow.
is so true about smokers. I've never smoked. I didn't grow up around it. And I mean, I don't understand like when they stand in front of a building and even though they can't smoke inside, they smoke right outside the front door. Like I have to walk through all of your smoke. My kids have to walk through your smoke in order to get in. I that just like I don't understand why people don't think about that, but you just said it. Never think about how it, affects other people, but yeah. All righty. Anybody else?
Oh,
I
bless
just
the
wanted to
Lord.
come.
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead, Crystal.
okay. I just wanted to comment about, the idea of smoking, you know, and how we were just talking about how the devil has his minions. Smoking has been glamorized in film.
Mhm.
I can remember my mother's generation, they all smoked,
Mhm.
all in smoke because it was
Yeah.
like this kind of sexy thing to do. And so that was the propaganda
Right.
of, to make people think that, smoking was glamorous.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
so, they just never considered, the impact on others because, what this was this idea that this was just something, I don't know, I guess wonderful to do,
Mhm. Mhm.
you know.
Yeah. Very
I
much.
remember that Marlboro cowboy on the billboard.
Listen,
He looked
listen.
good, didn't he?
I know. My grandmother on my mom's side, she smoked probably, I mean, literally 4 or 5 packs of cigarettes a day. It was a lot. And I remember as a kid, but she lived in New Orleans. So we didn't see, well, she visited with us all the time. Like I grew up with her, but she never would really smoke around us necessarily. She'd always be away somewhere. But I used to have to go, I mean, as a 8, 9, 10-year-old kid to the corner store to buy her cigarettes. I mean, you know, I remember those days. uh, but yeah, Don, I know you were going to say something, and then Zach, I'll get you.
Well, praise the Lord. Man, I tell you what, let's see, 8, 9 years old getting cigarettes. It's
Yes,
illegal now. But anyway,
yes,
that's
yes.
another story. You could have been thrown in jail just
I,
into, but anyway, with
she would give me enough money for cigarettes, and then you get a handful of the penny candy. Like that was what we did.
that was your goal. I need my
Penny
candy.
candy.
But anyway, oh, your addiction with candy. And okay, bless the Lord. But man, I tell you what, the piece, the last piece that we ended on. Mm, I'm so glad for my little honey. Amen.
Uh-huh.
And we
Mhm.
we we's gonna have some we gonna have some talking to do. Glory to God. Because I look back and I see the attacks
Mhm.
that the enemy threw, in our own marriage and,
Mhm.
and whatnot. And so to God be the glory.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, this is tearing the kingdom of darkness down
Mhm.
as we just as the spirit of the Lord impacts our lives and we see it. And we read something and just looking on the faces of the people that have their cameras on, we see, uh-oh, they got a aha.
Mhm.
Uh-oh, something's happening. And the comments, and we hear it and we see it and we experience it now. Yeah, the devil is not excited about this call. The
Mhm.
devil is going to do everything he possibly can to keep us from not getting on the call, to keep us from not going back to the recordings, to do anything, because he's on the run now. And glory to God, I like that, and we're gonna keep them on the run.
Amen.
We're just gonna receive the blessings of the Lord. To God be the glory.
Amen. Amen. And listen, for those of y'all, if you're not married, if you're single, don't think that you can't have a mastermind. You know, you don't have somebody else. Number one, that's you got a whole pool of people right here. You know, this is a mastermind group. This is what this was called together for, you know, part of that. So definitely don't think just because you don't have a spouse yet that that's not possible for you. So know that. Yes, Zach.
Hey, you just hit what I was what I
Uh-huh.
was calling to say.
Uh-huh.
And that was exactly what I was just about to say as far as the folks that aren't married. A lot of times we talk about when they say it, as a man finds a wife, he finds a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we also hear two heads are better than one and everything. But it's not just about the husband and the wife, it's about the body of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So you still have those people that you can be like-minded with and come together on one accord.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
but I was going to say something about the when you first started about the fear. Where did this come from? Did I not make this call out of fear, or did I make this phone call? Did I not do this? What was the purpose of it? That self-evaluation that has to take place every single day. And even though on one day we conquer it, one week we conquer it, and then Lakita, I'm there with you. I slipped right back into that. And I said, man, I thought I just got over that. I thought I was out of that area. I start drifting again. But it's just staying focused and everything, continuing to do that self-evaluation, continuing to stay in prayer, continuing to stay in the spirit, and just continuing to move forward. I would like to say I smoke cigars from time to time. I don't smoke often. But my buddies, we used to, we play dominoes once a month. And the fellas, we come together, we have our cigars and everything, and we just kick back and just talk junk and everything. So like Crystal said, it was glorified on TV when you see the successful guys and the successful people, you see them whip out a cigar. I'm trying to think, maybe that was how I got started, but I pretty much got started through my uncle. But like I said, I don't smoke often, and I understand that about that smell and the I'm considerate of others in that.
Gotcha.
So I wouldn't do that to you guys.
Appreciate it.
Yes, indeed.
Shelton. All righty, y'all. Rhonda, I see you, honey. I hate you can't speak. You can let it all out through the chat if you like. But yeah, okay, let me go ahead and I'm gonna